So the city fathers of Aegina did not take your advice. Your advice was to build at Delphi. They didn't want to do that. Who knows why? They instead decided to start construction in the old sanctuary of Athena Aphaea, on the island of Aegina itself. And you see that sanctuary here in an aerial view. It's about 11.5 kilometers from the town that it served. In and of itself, that wasn't a problem. You all remember, I'm sure, the Argive Heraion, which is far on the outskirts of the hinterland of Argos. A sanctuary could be the center of its city, like the Acropolis in Athens, but it could also, the main sanctuary of a city could mark the edge of its territory. It was kind of like a great big billboard, welcome to town, because that territory was part of the city-state, as we understand it. So here also the sanctuary of Aphaea was at some remove from the town and at a high point, which is appropriate for a sanctuary. And as I told you last time, they had decided, the Achaeans, the Aeginetans, had decided to decorate their new temple, construction of which began sometime around the year 500, with pedimental sculpture. And they made almost 2 complete sets of pediments, the subjects of which were apparently mythological. One of them was the abduction of Aegina, her nymphness, by Zeus. And I don't know that we've got enough of the second one to be sure of what the myth was, but it seems as if it was a myth. Of course, you're not looking at a mythological scene in this reconstruction here. You're looking at a battle. There are a lot of options for identifying what sort of battle this might be, but we can quickly come to a correct identification because, as you can see in these 2 drawings, you've got 2 sets of people fighting, and there are canonical battle types. There are Amazons versus Greeks, but since all the protagonists, except for the central figure of Athena in each of these, are male, this cannot be an Amazonomachy. That is, it can't be a battle between the Amazons and the Greeks because we don't have any girls. Another standard mythological battle is a gigantomachy. So we saw gigantomachy on one of the friezes, one of the frieze sets of the Siphnian treasury. For a gigantomachy, you need opponents that are marked as something other, superhuman, super deity strength, or snaky lower bodies. In some renditions, that's how the giants are, for example, on vase paintings. That's not what we see here. These are 2 sort of evenly matched opponents, so it can't be that. Third standard mythological battle, centauromachy, battle between the Lapiths and the centaurs. Centaurs are easy to spot. Half their body is a horse. Don't have half your body as a horse, cannot be a centauromachy. And that leaves exactly one other great mythological battle. What is that? Troy. Right. What you could call a Trojanomachy. Now, there are lots of Trojan Wars. There were lots of Trojan Wars in Greek mythology, not just one. And both the pediments of the Temple of Aphaea are Trojanomachies, but only one of them is Homer's Troy. Let's see. I always have to check because as you can imagine, it's a little hard to keep this straight. All right. So you're looking here at drawings of the 2 pediments, and we're going to look at them in a little bit more detail in a moment. The top one, the west one, which is the back one, the back of the temple. So, which is this one, I think. No, this is the east front. so anyway, the back of the temple, which I'll just go back one more. All right, so when you walk up, this is the front of the temple. This is the east side of the temple. So there were pediments at both ends. You would have walked around to the back of the temple, and then you could have stood in front of the west end. You could have walked in. There's a little kind of porch. But to get into the main cella where the cult statue would have been, you would have had to go up the little ramp and into the front end. So the back, the west end of the west pediment is Homer's Troy. And the east is an earlier Trojan battle, and we'll get to that in a second. All right, so on the west, on the back, a Trojan war, any battle is a terrific choice for a pediment, because a pediment is a problem. And the problem is that it's a triangle, which is a terrible shape for a story, because the top gets lower, and quickly, too. You really only have one spot where somebody can actually stand up super straight, and then everybody has to start to get smaller. So the Aeginetans came up with two approaches to this problem, and so successful were these approaches that for a long, long time, all the other pedimental sculpture that gets made follows these two approaches, because this is a clever idea. In fact, it's so clever you have to wonder how come the Greeks made pedimental sculpture for 100 years before somebody figured this out. Point number one, whoever stands in the middle is going to be bigger than anybody else if everybody's going to be at the same scale. So one approach to pedimental sculpture had been to make people at different scales. That's what happens in the little pediment of the Siphnian treasury. And another approach had been to have different sort of scenelets, like sort of snapshots as you go down. But if you're going to have everybody at the same scale, which is nice because it sort of looks more sensible that way, but one person is going to have to then be bigger than everybody else because they're going to be in the center. Who's that person going to be? A god. Yeah, you can only have a god in the middle, and actually the people of the Siphnian treasury, they too had figured this out, so they had Zeus right in the middle under the apex of the pediment, and the Aeginetans do this too. The temple is this amalgamated deity, Athena Aphaea, and it is Athena herself who is the central figure on both sides, on the east and the west. And you see her standing upright, looking serious and purposeful, straight out at you. Spear, helmet, shield, the works. Then, solution number one is to put a deity in the center. And solution number two is to have a subject that naturally allows all these same scaled figures to be in poses that will naturally be accommodated by the ever-sloping roof line of the pediment. And a battle is perfect, because in a battle you can have people who are hurling spears, and you can have people who are lunging, and you can have people who are collapsing, and you can have people who are dead. And then they are falling down in the corners, which is a very tight fit in a pediment, and that's perfect. So the two Trojanomiches accommodate the nutty idea of putting an entire scene in a great big triangular space. So you see here the west pediment. On the west pediment, all the action goes out, from the center out. So it's centrifugal as a composition, and that is easy to see, that the figure is immediately moving away from Athena, who, of course, you must not imagine as actually being on the field of battle. She's not there. She is in everybody's mind, she is looking down, she is omnipresent, but she is not physically standing around while all the action whirls around about her. Nobody, I think, would have imagined it that way. On the Siphnian treasury, when you have that great frieze with the death of Sarpedon, one half are the gods on Olympus, and you know they're gods among other reasons because they're all seated down, but their heads are at the same level as the guys, so they're twice as big minimally. But so they're separated horizontally. One half are the gods, one half are the poor people down on the fields of Troy. Here, Athena is sort of supra presence. There are pairs of fighters on either side moving away from her, as you can see. And this is a very interesting moment in the evolution of Greek sculpture. And one of the reasons it's an interesting moment is because of the red figure revolution in vase painting. In the red figure revolution in vase painting, painters, artists, were given the opportunity to start drawing instead of incising. And with that, they were able to begin showing figures more realistically moving in space. And suddenly, the idea of conveying the human figure in motion became a good thing, a possible thing, and the sculptors really got on board. For about 100 years, we had kuroi, and there's nothing that naturalistic about a kouros. He stands in a funny position, both feet are flat on the ground, and yet he's in motion. You really got to wonder where his center of gravity is. Is he actually walking? It's a problem. But it didn't bother anybody for 100 years. It's not as if everybody said, we've got to fix this. No, it was good the way it was. Everybody understood who these guys were. They fulfilled a whole set of functions, and it was like shorthand. Everybody understood it. But once the vase painters started drawing, like Euthymides, for example, and his revelers, sculptors began thinking, how can we do this too? And so suddenly the possibility of showing figures very naturally in moving and reacting with their muscles contracting and so on, in all of the ways that the vase painters were doing, sculptors start doing too. So on the west pediment here at the Temple of Aphaea, there's a nice opportunity for sculptors to do this, and they're not exactly all the way there. The figures physically are very realistic looking. I mean, these guys are very natural looking, but they're kind of silhouetted in a weird cutout way. They're in arrested motion, but the muscles of their body do not really conform to the extremities of their movement. They're carrying heavy equipment, and they're nude, which makes it a lot easier to examine how their bodies are reacting to the fact that, for example, one of them is carrying a very heavy shield. It's not covered up. He's not covered up by cloaks or anything like that. And they don't really look as if they're especially encumbered or breathless or stopping or starting. There, you get the sense of everything as a kind of cutout, more two-dimensional than three-dimensional. A nice example of that is this archer who is W11. He is, how do we actually know that these guys are Trojans? I mean, I told you that there were these standard battles, but maybe this would have been a different battle. But the Greeks are nude, with the exception of their warriorness stuff. And the guys that they're fighting are clothed in what was the typical kind of battle garb that, at least in the visual arts, Oriental fighters, that is to say, anybody from the East, so Persian or Trojan, would have been fighting in. And one of the aspects of their battle garb is that they're clothed. So they have these little leggings, as you can see, and they have different sorts of helmets, and so that marks them as Eastern, which fits with Trojan. Now, I told you last time that all these sculptures are in the Glyptothek in Munich, a terrific museum with a great research department. And a number of years ago, they began looking again hard at these sculptures under UV light, because when you look at marble under UV light, you can see the residue of paint. And they were able to reconstruct how these sculptures actually originally looked, the painting of them. Yeah. So my favorite aspect of this I actually think is super cool. The chevron pattern on his leggings, the diamond pattern on his leggings, the diamonds expand and contract on his legs with the tension in his legs. So when you looked at the sculpture, you couldn't see that. The sculptors were not able to create that effect, but the painters were. So the people who did the painting on the sculptures, they made up for that. Although there's still this little bit of a disconnect, both in the fact that the body as a whole doesn't convey any tension. I personally have never been in this pose. Okay, so I'm not sure I could say, but if you're about to draw back the arrow, wouldn't there be some stiffening? Didn't anybody watch biathlon in the Olympic? Right? That's the rifle. That's not the arrow. Well, anyway, you get my point. And so we would like to see more tension here. We don't. Also, the expression on his face, that's a little strange. The archaic smile, still there. These guys are in the moment, and as we all remember from Andy Stewart's article about the Teneo Chorus, that's what the archaic smile conveys, but that somehow just doesn't seem totally appropriate. All right. So, as I said, figures in all stages of lunging, collapse, and fall, very appropriate for this pediment. You're looking here at the front of W12 and then 13 and 14 down here in the corner. And so you get the sense of dominoes falling down. So this is Homer's Troy. Why is that a relevant subject right now? Sometime in the first decade of the 5th century BCE. Let's say around 495. What has just happened? What's happened in the last 4 or 5 years? You might want to take a quick back look at your notes from last time. Why is the Trojan War relevant? Or is it not relevant? Is it just Trojan War? The Greeks were fighting the Persians. What happens in 499? The Athenians come to the aid of the Ionians. Who are the Ionians? them folks live in what we now call Turkey, the Ionian coast of Turkey. Why were those cities revolting? Why were they rebelling? What inspired them to rebel? What had happened in Athens in the previous decade? What happened in Athens at the end of the 6th century? Democracy. And that made all the folks on the Ionian coast think, we want some democracy too. But we can't have democracy because those Persians are in charge of us. They're a great big empire. They have an emperor. Who needs that? We also want democracy. We're Greeks. Let's rebel. Athens says, okay, we'll send help, right? 499, the Athenians sent help. The Ionian revolt, they sacked Sardis. And the Ionian cities are brought back under Persian control 493, but let's say that we're in 495 right now. That's a couple years before that. So it looks like democracy is taking hold, and the Persians, this Eastern monarchical power, are transposed into the Trojans. So we've got the plucky Greeks and the megalomaniac Easterners. Thank you for asking that extremely excellent question. That is Persian type garb. That is Persian battle garb. So the Trojans are transposed as Persians. Exactly. Where is W8? W8, 9, 10, 7. I don't know. I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't know. Good question. I got this out of the glyptotech's own numbering system. So maybe they just left 8 out for a reason. I'll have to look into that. This W7, W7 guy in the corner, he's dying, and his chest really there was a hole in it. There had to have been some kind of metal implement, so he is holding onto the end of a spear that has pierced his sternum, and he is falling. He's dying. Life is ebbing out of him. You would never know it. He looks like he's getting ready to settle in with popcorn to watch something on the big screen in a rec room. He's really comfortable, and he's apparently happy. He has this happy expression on his face. It is most peculiar. We'll be looking at him again shortly. So here's a detail of his face. The disconnect must have been apparent almost immediately, as you'll see when we get around to the pediment on the other side. So here's the pediment on the other side, east, and the central figure again is Athena. And here is her face, and she looks very different already than Mr. East 7. West 1 looks very different from East 1 looks very different from West 7. She looks, solemn and composed and serene. On the east side, on the front, the action is organized differently. Instead of all the action fleeing away from the center, figures are coming in towards the center. It's also set up differently. On the west, there were a series of duels. 2 guys, 2 guys, 2 guys. These dual compositions on either side of the central figure of Athena. Here, on this side, there is all these figures are facing Athena. And just this one guy is fighting here. And this guy, who we'll meet in a moment, is shooting all the way across. And there's only one person who his subject can be, and that's this guy, all the way down here, because none of the rest of these guys are wounded from him, and this one is falling from him. Okay. This fellow, who we'll meet in a minute, is Heracles. He's got the lion's head on him, and that is the clue to what subject is on this pediment. So back before Homer's Troy, there was another king of Troy, Laomedon. And he had a daughter who got herself into some physical trouble someplace, and Heracles came to her rescue. And the expectation was that he was going to be able to marry her, and so he came to Troy to claim her after he brought her back to Dad, to Laomedon, and Laomedon reneged on the expectation. And that totally ticked Heracles off. So Heracles went and got one of his childhood friends, Telamon, the son of the first king of Aegina, Aegeus, Telamon, the dad of Ajax, who was fighting in Homer's Troy. Telamon, the friend of Heracles, and Heracles go to Troy and wreak a little havoc. And Heracles kills Laomedon. That's the story. Why on earth is this story on the east pediment? Why is this story on the east pediment of the Temple of Aphaea? What a wacky little story. Think back to the reasons, the subjects, the ideas that you had last time about what should go on the temple. Have a quick chat. Make it snappy here. Have a quick chat. What is the point of this subject on the east pediment? Okay, have you guys decided?
I just had a question. Who was being abducted?
Oh, nobody's being abducted. Heracles is, you could say, overreacting to a slight. Heracles had saved from some, perils of Pauline problem the daughter of Laomedon, and then he went to Troy to get her in marriage, and Laomedon, who I guess, not wanting to add too much to the mythological script, I think you can imagine something like Heracles says to Laomedon, "Oh, your daughter's in trouble, I'll go get her, and, if you give her hand to me in marriage," and Laomedon says, "Fine," and so Heracles goes, and then when he brings her back, Laomedon says, "Oh, you know what, I changed my mind," and so then Heracles goes home and gets Telamon, and they come back and have a little Trojan War. So that's the story. All right. Why is this a good subject? Heracles is supported by Athena, although he's not the main. So this is probably Telamon right here, East 1. So you guys are looking actually at East 2 and 3, and this figure East 2, he has to be a Trojan because he's the only because this is Heracles. So these are Greeks or Aeginetans. And so this one guy on this side must be the main Trojan, and this must be the main Aeginetan. So this has got to be Telamon. So this has got to be Priam, who is the son this must be Laomedon. So Heracles, but Heracles is not, of course, the main point. Who are the Aeginetans always sort of antagonistic with? The Athenians. The year's about 495. Who's the big man on campus right now in the Greek world? No, I mean in terms of city-states. Athens. Why? What has Athens just done? Yes, and then what? Sacked Sardis, helped in the Ionian revolts. Yay, Athens, policemen for the people, saviors of the Greeks. Oh man, those Athenians, they just think they're the bee's knees. So you're not Athenian, you're on Aegina. And that is very clever, and let me disentangle the parts of it. So you're saying Heracles is connected with Athens on account of how we were talking about Pisistratus and Heracles being very popular in Athenian vase painting, which is totally true. Heracles himself, however, in Greek mythology, Pisistratus's sort of kind of association with him notwithstanding, is a Peloponnesian hero. So he's not Athenian. The big Athenian hero, I mean the homegrown Athenian hero, just to be clear, was Theseus. I'm sorry, I know there's way too many of these folks. So, but yes, this is a story that showcases Aeginetans, not other heroes, or Aeginetans are the main important characters here. So we've got Telamon, the father of Ajax, the son of Aegeus, the founder of Troy, and in the story, Heracles is the guy who really does the dispatching, but in the pediment, Telamon is the most upright, vanquishing sort of warrior. Now, who do we understand the Trojans to be? Persians. Who are the heroes in this pediment? Not Athenians. Who did the vanquishing just 4 years earlier? Athenians. What's the point of this pediment? What is the point of this pediment? Yeah. Oh, yeah, you Athenians. Been there, done that. Right. Yes, there were the Athenians going to Sardis and helping the Ionians. And yes, there's Homer's Troy, and Achilles is such a big deal, although Ajax was also very great. Ajax is almost certainly one of the fellows fighting on the West Pediment. We cannot actually tell who's who on that pediment. We can't identify them for sure. And then even before that, there was this other battle. So these battles against the Persians, they've been, and Trojans and Easterners in general, they've been going on forever. And here's one of the earliest. And who are the stars? And who wins? Talk about your hometown team. All right. Here's our fellow Heracles. And he is an archer, the same way that we had W11 on the other side as an archer. And here you see this nice comparison between them, and you get the so you already observed the difference in the faces between, for example, the dying warrior on the west side and the Athena on the east side, and how she's very serious. You can see here the real difference, the most impressive difference in how the sculptors, in just in a couple of years, have started to make their sculpture do what the painters have been making the paintings do. So Heracles is in he's in the thick of battle, and he suddenly needs to stop and shoot. He sees a chance to shoot, and he gets down. Look at his arms, look at the muscles on his legs, look at his bent knee, and look at this. He's actually balancing. He's in motion. I mean, this guy is perfectly balanced, as if he's gotten himself all set up before he does it. He has all the time in the world. He's like posing. And Heracles is moving. He's actually in action. The most dramatic comparison on either side, the piece that shows us that it must have been the west pediment must have been done before the east pediment by just a couple of years, is the comparison of the two dying warriors in the corners. So here we have East 11. This is Laomedon. This is the guy that Heracles must be shooting. And here we have the warrior from the other side. This warrior has been shot. He is losing strength. He cannot even hold his hand anymore around his shield. His grip is loosening. His fingers are going limp. He's trying to balance himself and hold on. He is losing the battle. And the most dramatic comparison is with their faces. The dying warrior on the west is looking straight out at you with that wacky, archaic smile. And on the east, Laomedon is in profile, and his eye is starting to just barely close, but he's also, nobody would have been able to see this, of course. He's way up on pediment, way up above your head, and he is in the corner. The shadow of the eave must have been somewhat dark. You wouldn't really have been able to probably make out these details, but the sculptor knew it. I mean, he knew what he was doing. He is operating just from that point of human connection where one person is embodying another in art. So it's not about whether you could see this, it's about what he knew to have been the truth. And what he knew is that this man has been mortally wounded, and he is grimacing. His teeth are clenched. His the muscles on his face are rigid. They're taut. His eye is starting to close. These are very small details that you only tell in close-up, but tell you that rather than a single universal ideal, we have now a single individual who reacts and falls in his own particular way. The same story. A Trojan falls on the field of battle, 20 years or so apart, 25 years or so apart. Sarpedon on the Euphroneus crater, Laomedon on the east pediment of the temple of Aphaea. Who, to a Greek looking at this vase in the year 520, is Sarpedon? And who, to a Greek looking at this pediment in the year 495, 25 years later, is Laomedon? So they both fought on the side of Troy in the Trojan War. Looks like you need to have a small chat. Have a small chat. Thanks. What do you think? Who did we decide he is in a larger sense? How would this story have been seen to a Greek in 495? So do you remember, because we were just talking about this about 5 minutes ago? Oh, no, yeah, okay, but, right, Laomedon. But in a larger, so is it just a story?
No, it's supposed to, like, show that
Yes, so in terms of myth, it shows the primacy of Aegina, but is there some more current interpretation? It is true that they are going to, well, actually they're sleep and death, and they are going to take him to the countryside of Broad Lycia, where he will be buried with tombstone and mound, as is the right of man. That's a quote from the Iliad, translated. So that is true. But the characters I'm talking about are Sarpedon in this case and Laomedon in this case. We did decide that. We decided that the Trojans were representations of the Persians. Yes, you are not imagining things. Therefore, Laomedon is, yes, he's a specific individual. Yes, he stands for an earlier glorious victory by the Aeginetans of long ago against the Trojans of long ago. But he also stands in for a current enemy. The current enemy is the Persians. In other words, Laomedon is not us. Laomedon is them. Laomedon is the enemy. He's a current enemy. What about Sarpedon? The year is 520. Pisistratus is in power in Athens. Things are going along great in the Athenian Potter's Quarter. Parties all the time, everywhere. Life is good. Actually, in 520, it's Hippias, not Pisistratus, but anyway. He's a Pisistratid. Who is Sarpedon? He's a son of Zeus, right. I mean, yes, they all have individual mythological biographies. Oh, at Troy? Oh, no, well, no. He's not actually, he's from Lycia, he's not from Troy, so he's not I mean, he's a great fighter on the Trojan side, but he's... No, everything was fine under him. My question is, if you can look at both of these as some sort of larger metaphorical message. So it's a story, and it's not just a story. Because if it was just a story, it wouldn't have much power. It would just be kind of entertaining. It would be interesting. But these are not just stories, as I hope we have established. These are These are templates. These are metaphors. These are signals. These are symbols. So the Trojan War and its earlier renditions is a metaphor for the war against the Persians. In other words, he has become a political metaphor. The myth has become political. What about this? Is it so? Here? And why? How do we know that we should read him that way?
Well, the way that there's so much ceremony about him.
Exactly. The ceremony, the elegance, the care, the honor. If sleep and death come to carry you off the battlefield, you are not a bad guy. If the gods are looking down and wondering how or whether to care for you, you are not a bad guy.
Like just the posture of the two of them, like they're both dying, but one is like grimacing in death and is like kind of struggling for it, and the other one is kind of, I mean, obviously he's already dead, but he's in a pose that doesn't look painful. It looks like sleeping, like restful.
It's true. He is very elegantly composed and drawn, and you, except for the fact that there's blood coming out of his gashes, you don't have you don't have that sense. In part, that's a function of the time period in which it's made. So that kind of intensity of emotion, we're just starting to see now, and you would be hard put, I think, to find an example of such on a piece of archaic art, whether it would be a painted pot or a sculpture. Instead, the mantra of the archaic age is that smile, as we saw on the dying warrior on the other pediment. So the dying warrior on the other pediment actually is the end point of this kind of death is all right. It's not a single localized tragedy. It's part of the life cycle and the human condition. And what you hope for is a glorious death, a beautiful death, an honorable death. And that's what Sarpedon receives here. So that's partially why.
If they're trying to draw the analogy between the Trojans and the Persians, why is it that Laomedon and other Trojans in this pediment are not very orientalized? That archaeized everybody's that royalty, but it would make more sense if they would be wearing that orientalized to make that all that more clear.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why on the West Pediment the Trojan fighters are garbed, and on the East Pediment they're not. And it probably does have something to do with a sense of trying to put the story at a heroic remove, and make it less topical. So because, as was noted acutely, the garb on the other pediment, so they might be Trojans, but they're garbed like Persians. So this puts them back into Mythland, and differentiates this fight from the fight on the other side. So, it could be something like that. Of course, we don't, again, not being privy to the minutes of the meeting in which they all stood around and talked about this. We can't really know. So when you look at those poems and you're connecting up these images, these pieces of art, and these stories, remember that times change, politics change, events change, and people's associations, even with the same stories, change. You know, this is why, for example, just to get current, why the enemy in James Bond movies has changed. You know, it used to be the Russians, right? Dr. No, I don't know if any of you are a fan of old James Bond movies. I'm myself a very big fan of James Bond. But so that was back in the Cold War. Then, you know, after the Cold War was over, after the Berlin Wall fell, I don't know how many of you paid attention, but the enemy in the James Bond movies had to change. That just didn't work anymore. I mean, you might have not thought it was all that realistic in the first place, but in any event, same thing. So these stories, these kind of fairy tale, legendary, mythical stories with these enemies, we read these things, we understand them in a certain way, and then as politics change, the stories, the people, their association, our associations with them to current events change as well, and that's what's happened here. So we have two Trojans, we have two enemies, but only one of them would have been perceived at the time that this piece was made as an enemy. The other was perceived, as has been eloquently explained to us, as one of us, as emblematic of the best of us, dying a heroic death. It's topos. It's a subject that began to so using the Persian Wars, the current events as the backdrop meant that in the first decade or so, the first couple of decades of the 5th century BCE, many artists sought to find their subjects by using old myths that had Eastern that had heroes from the Trojan War stories, and using those in rendition. So this, for example, is this beautiful cup by the early red figure vase painter Duris. And here is the daughter of Dawn, the goddess Eos, the goddess Dawn, had a son named Memnon. He dies at Troy, and she comes down so sadly to take his body away. And here you see a vase where I just feel like Duras must have seen the east pediment of the Temple of Athea at Aegina, because the figure of Memnon is with his hands lifeless, his fingers outstretched, his eye closed, and his body being easily picked up by his mother and taken away. Seems so similar in mood to that figure. But also the fighting scenes, like, for example, those that we see on both pediments, become very popular on vase painting at this time. So here we've got the Greek hero Achilles, and that same Memnon before he's dispatched by Achilles, fighting on a cup. You might think that these would be strange, not so palatable topics on drinking cups for a party, but the sense of triumphalism, especially in Athens, and these are Athenian products. These red figure vases are from Athens now. Both of these red figure vases are from Athens. So the sense of triumphalism was in the air. Little scrappy Athens declares democracy, helps the Ionian cities declare democracy, fights back against the great big Persian Empire. The freedom-loving West, the despotic, imperialist East. Does that sound familiar? Some stories Stick around. Meanwhile, down in the Peloponnese, in the corner of the Peloponnese where the Pan-Hellenic sanctuary of Olympia is, life was kind of quiet. The Persian Wars, the battles, didn't really have much effect here. That's because in this valley of the region of Achaia in the northwestern Peloponnese, the Olympiads went on, and the Olympic festival, which took place in this broad valley that has two long, lazy rivers running through it. This is one of them, the Alpheus and the Claudius. There are two towns, one very close to the sanctuary of Zeus at Olympia, and one a little further away. The two towns were Pisa and Ellis. Pisa and Elis. Pisa was a small town, Elis a larger one. Elis had an oligarchic government. They didn't have a democracy, so there was a few aristocrats who were in charge. The few aristocrats had kind of half-heartedly sent a small contingent of fighters to help out at one of the battles in the Persian War, but they got there late and weren't needed by that time and came home. And the folks, the rest of the people who lived in Elis, were so embarrassed by this because the great battle of the day was fighting the Persians, and the great political movement of the day was democracy, and the people in Elis felt that they were behind the times and not, they were embarrassed by their non-participation in this great clash, and they were behind the times in terms of personal political revolution. And so there was an uprising and an overtaking of the oligarchic government in Elis by a democratic faction. And soon thereafter, that democratic faction, just in case you think that what that means is that there was peace and love and everybody saying kumbaya, attacked the little town of Pisa and captured it. And with that, and the town of Pisa in and of itself wouldn't have provided much money, but the town of Pisa controlled the Olympic Games because they were the town that was closest to it. And with the capture of Pisa, Elis came into a ton of money because, unlike today, where it costs the town a lot of money to have the Olympic Games, like Vancouver apparently is going to be in debt for 10 years, back then, it was just all about money coming in. Because if you came to the games, you stayed for a while, and then you had to have a place to stay, and you had to pay for lodging, and you had to pay for food. And if you came in an event that, for example, used horses, like a chariot race, well, you cannot just come the day before. Horses don't like that. Horses don't like to travel all that much. So it's going to take a little while to get there, and then you need them to get used to it, so you need to be there for a while, and while you're there, you need to, rent some stable space, you need to buy food for them, and all of this stuff costs money. So people who competed in the Olympic Games paid a lot of money. So a lot of revenue came in to the little town of Pisa, and then once Pisa was captured by Elis, Elis got all this money. And they decided to build a new temple to Zeus inside the sanctuary at Olympia.
Who exactly took over Pisa?
Elis. E-L-I-S, the town of Elis.
And they were the Democratic faction.
Yes, they were. So you're looking here at the broad ground of the altis, the sanctuary, the temenos of Zeus at Olympia, and the first temple at Olympia, which is actually a temple to Hera. And for a long time, Zeus had a big altar, a huge altar, and Hera had a temple. But shortly after the capture of Pisa by Ellis, a new temple, a bigger and better temple, was decided upon by the Eleans. And so here you see the sanctuary, a plan of the sanctuary. Here is the Temple of Hera that you were just looking at, and then here is where the Temple of Zeus gets built. Temple of Zeus was built sometime between 470 and 460, and it stood until an earthquake toppled it some point in the Middle Ages. And it had really big columns, as you can tell from these two friends of mine who are perching and leaning on some of the column drums of the temple. So the temple collapsed, and all of its parts, including all of its sculptural decoration, were covered by mud until they were excavated in pretty good condition by German archaeologists at the in the early part of the 20th century. This, which is not the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, is one of the temples of Hera at Paestum in Italy, is what the Temple of Zeus would have looked like. This is a temple whose proportions and size are practically identical to that of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, with the difference that it is actually standing intact. So you can get a sense of how magnificent the Temple of Zeus must have been. You see a couple people down here acting as scale. The major difference between the Temple of Hera at Paestum, which you're looking at here, and the Temple of Zeus at Olympia is that the Temple of Hera had no sculptural decoration. You know, a temple is pretty expensive and a lot of work and takes a lot of planning. So a temple is already a very pious and pricey dedication, an expression of great devotion, to say nothing of money, by its dedicating folks to a deity. Sculpture is many, many maraschino cherries on top. So the Temple of Hera at Paestum had no sculpture, but the Temple of Zeus did. And in the 10 minutes that I've left today, I will start, and next time we will finish, because the sculpture of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia is, I think, the supreme example and supreme achievement and supreme expression of Greek cultural identity in the classical world. Therefore, we're going to spend a certain amount of time on it, and you have a certain amount of extra reading about it, which comes from this book, Architect and Sculptor in Classical Greece. The readings are on the additional reading tab on the course website. This is the most perfect book ever written about Greek art, in my opinion. And you must read the parts that I signed. You will be happy for the rest of your life that you have done that. It is so beautiful. It is wonderful. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia had 2 sculpted pediments and 12 sculpted metopes. Pediments, of course, are on the outside. We'll get to the details in a second. The metopes were on the inside. The metopes were over the porch. So you're looking here at the plan. This is the east side. You would have walked in this side. This is a reconstruction of the east. You would have walked. So this is really a good idea. This is really clever. Why? I'll tell you why. Because you only have to look at one set of pictures at a time. It's not competitive. You can focus. That's very nice. So you're standing on the outside. You're looking up. You just see the pediment. Concentrate on that. When you walk into the temple, then you look up, and over the interior porch, there's also a Doric frieze, 6 metopes, 8 triglyphs, and there's 6 sculpted metopes there. When you walk around to the back of the temple, another pediment. So you look up on the west side, you see a pediment. And when you walk into the back porch there, another 6 metopes. The 6 metopes on the front and the 6 metopes on the back are the same one cycle. They are the 12 Labors of Heracles. Now, you saw Labors of Heracles on the Athenian treasury. You saw some. Some of these are some of the same labors. Heracles has a lot of mythological associations. He had a lot of stories, had a lot of labors. And it's not as if somebody sat down and said, which are the 12 most important, or are there 12, or are there more, or how many Labors of Heracles can you come up with, or something like that. Different people had different stories, probably different places had labors that they favored or not. The sculptors, the planners of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia picked 12 of the stories that circulated about Heracles and depicted those stories in 12 metopes, and that became the 12 Labors of Heracles. They created the idea of 12 labors. And that has everything to do with the fact that on a Doric temple that is 6 columns across the front, the interior porch has room for 6 metopes, and the back porch has room for 6 metopes, and 6 and 6 make 12, and that's how we get 12 Labors of Heracles. It has everything to do with Doric temple proportions. Okay. East pediment. Story number 1. Let me also say this is in your book. Back in early mythological times, there was a king of Pisa. You remember Pisa? What's Pisa? What's Pisa? What's Pisa? Why does Pisa matter? So it's a little town that owned the that were the people who oversaw the Olympic Games until what happens to Pisa? Gets taken over by Ellis. Okay. So the current history is in your head now? All right. There was a king of Pisa. His name was Enemaus. He had a beautiful daughter. Her name was Hippodamia. Trainer of horses, leader of horses. Enemaus had received an oracle that he would be killed by his son-in-law. Therefore, he had zero intention of marrying off Hippodamia. That would be how he would stay alive. He, however, was a king, and he had a beautiful daughter, and there were many suitors who came to claim her hand. They didn't necessarily know about this oracle. Enemaus was the son of Poseidon. All those early kings had deified dads. He was the son of Poseidon. Poseidon, shaker, trainer of horses, among his other talents and exploits. And he had given Enemaus horses that could run very, very, very fast. Enemaus would challenge each of these suitors to a chariot race. And he would let them go first. The chariot race started at the river Claudius, right next to the Altis, the sanctuary area of Olympia, and it ran all the way across the top of the Peloponnese to the Isthmus of Corinth. Enemaus would let the suitor go ahead, and then he would come from behind, and as he was overtaking the suitor, he would stab him in the back. And then he would win, and 13 suitors had come and challenged and died for the hand of Hippodamia, and then Pelops comes along. Pelops is the son of Zeus. And there is a version of the story in which Pelops bribes the groomsmen of Aegina to substitute in the chariot wheel a wax linchpin for the pin that holds the wheel on. And in the race that takes place, Pelops wins. The wheel on Aegina chariot falls off. Pelops wins. He receives the hand of Hippodamia. And some of you may be familiar with a couple of the offspring of this family. Agamemnon, Menelaus, and some of you may be familiar with what happens, for example, to Agamemnon, who comes home from the Trojan War and is murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra. So it's a chariot race, the first chariot race to take place, in mythological terms, at Olympia, and it is a race that is fixed and that ends short-term in victory and long-term in tragedy. Okay, we'll pick up here on Tuesday. Read Ashmole. Read this reading over the weekend.